how do you build a high-performing team? What is the secret? Today I'm going to talk about Amazon's secret way of building high-performing teams and the tool that they call the bar. And I don't mean this kind of bar, not this kind of bar. I mean more this kind of bar. It's like a performance bar, or they call it the hiring bar frequently. Think of this as being the standard of performance that you're expecting from your team. Now, just before I go into this, I want to talk to you a little bit about the difference between Google and Amazon, because this is really helpful. I was at Google for 6 years and at Amazon for 2 years. And one of the biggest differences I found while there is the difference in how they hire and how they manage people. Google's philosophy is basically hire smart people and make them comfortable, give them lots of perks and all that, give them some ambitious goals and hope they do great things. Now, whereas Amazon's is basically hire people who've done a lot of great things in the past, make them uncomfortable without perks, and give them ambitious goals and hope they do more great things. Now, the difference here is basically the hiring philosophy. Google hires for smarts, Amazon hires for past performance. The way this works out in practice is that Google uses case studies or hypotheticals or brain teasers in their questions, or at least they used to when I was there, and they did for a very long time afterwards. They certainly started out with that. And so they hire a lot of people who are really good at thinking on their feet, at answering these hypothetical questions, at performing in exam-like conditions, which is great, but that doesn't always lend itself to high performance at work. So Google tends to have a lot of people who are really, really good at making people think they're intelligent. Now, this is good in many ways, especially if that's what you're looking for. If you're running a consulting business, that's a great way of hiring because you want people who can handle a case, get something abstract, answer it really well, and present well and convince people they're smart rapidly. It doesn't work for most companies though, because what you need is people who will actually perform over a longer period of time. So that's why Amazon looks at your past performance, and that's what they're doing. So let's talk about what this performance bar is. The bar is actually clear expectations. That's what it means. It's all about having clear expectations for every role and level that you manage. And it's the way that we use these that's really important. So we'll talk about that a bit later on. But just as an example, a senior software engineer, and you want to, when you're reading this, if you manage different kinds of people, or if you're thinking about yourself in your own role, you want to think about these expectations adapted to your own environment. So a senior software engineer should be able to reliably deliver high quality, scalable and efficient software that sets a benchmark for the team. They should be able to guide and mentor junior software engineers and help build a strong team. They should be able to contribute to the roadmap and technical strategy of their product and team. They should be able to identify and solve complex problems spanning multiple products or teams, and they should be able to collaborate with cross-functional teams, including product managers, designers, and stakeholders. Now, realistically, if you're not a software engineer, if you're not in the technology business, some of this may make a little less sense, but practically speaking, this is pretty easily to understand for almost any person in any role. It just happens to be specific about efficient software and things like that. If you're in a different role, you would adapt your expectations. You want to adapt this to the roles and levels that you manage. So if you have very junior engineers, software engineers, for example, you want to make sure that you're clear about what kinds of level of work that you're expecting from those junior engineers. And probably if you've got a junior software engineer straight out of university, they're not going to be spending a lot of time, they're not going to be great at solving large, complicated problems across multiple teams. They're going to need a lot more experience for that. So you need to have your expectations set correctly. But if you're managing a series of C-level executives, you're going to be expecting them not just to solve problems across multiple teams, but guide multiple teams and provide direction for multiple teams. So you have to have this set for the right level in your organization and the roles. So these roles, like if you have software engineers and designers or analysts or marketers or salespeople, you're going to have different expectations. The other thing you're going to have to do is get really good at applying these expectations to different contexts, including your own, obviously, but more than just your own. And we'll get to why that is. The kinds of situations you're looking for is how do you apply that to other teams around you, like understanding how you understand the levels and the competencies or what people are looking for, the bar in different teams, especially when they have the same kinds of roles. And when you're interviewing people, you need to get really good at understanding what they have done and how do I assess that in relation to my own expectations. Now, one thing I didn't mention, by the way, is this concept of levels. Levels, at least at Amazon, they have numbers for levels. So a graduate will be level 4, then level 5, level 6, 7, 8, 10, they don't have a 9 because they don't believe in middle management. But 8 would be a director, 10 is a vice president, 11 is a senior vice president, 12 is the CEO. Now, that's Amazon's way of doing it. Google has a similar system with some different numbers. A lot of companies use letters. If you don't have a formalized leveling system, you want to at least understand, how do I think about these roles and levels and definitions, and how do I separate people into things that I can compare? So I'm using the word senior software engineer. At Amazon, a senior software engineer would probably, I think, is a level 6 role. It's usually someone with 5 to 10 years experience. So that's what I'm meaning by levels. Now, let's go on with this. So what do you use this bar for? Like, we've got this idea of these expectations. What are you using it for? Well, number one, you're going to use it for hiring. You're going to use it for helping decide who is in my team and who am I selecting to bring in. You're going to use this for assessing people. So once your people are in your team, you have to do performance assessments. How are they in relation to my expectations? Number three, you're going to use this for coaching. How are you developing people? How do you help them meet the expectations and exceed those expectations and reach the next level of expectations? And hence, we're going to use this for promoting people. Like, are you at the next level of expectations? Are you ready for promoting? So let's go through these one by one. Firstly, how do you hire? And I want you to just think briefly about how you do so. How you actually hire people now. One of the philosophies that that comes up sometimes when I talk about this is stock markets, and we have this saying, past performance does not predict future performance, and that's the case with stock. And this is Disney over the last, I think it's 10 years. You can certainly see if you happen to buy this at that time where it's at the peak, and you look back at your past performance, you'd be pretty disappointed about the future performance, like the performance you got after that past performance. But just because it's down now doesn't mean that it's going to stay down. Now, I'm not an analyst, I'm not looking at Disney, but you can make your own judgment on this. The point here is that with stock markets and with financial things like that, past performance does not predict future performance. But with people, it's different. And if you look at these people, like we've got Sheryl Sandberg here, Tom Cruise, Taylor Swift, Magnus Carlsen, Serena Williams, and Max Verstappen. If you looked at any of these people without knowing who they are, like if you didn't know who they are, and I just told you their track records of what they've done, you would expect these people to be pretty good at running large teams in big tech businesses, or pretty good at attracting people to big action movies, or pretty good at writing music and attracting a large crowd of following and selling out massive concert tours, and so on. You'd expect to lose the match against Magnus Carlsen if you played chess with him, unless you really are impressive. You'd expect probably to lose to Serena Williams if you'd expect her to be doing very well in the Wimbledon final. Now, obviously she's retired now, but her track record at her peak was that. Max Verstappen, you'd expecting him to be winning races. That's what you expect. So if you're going to hire Max Verstappen, you know that because of his track record, you know that he's likely to be performing very well in the future. So how do we assess this? Now, obviously with these people, these are world leaders, and you all know them, you know the background. With the people you're interviewing as candidates for your jobs, you don't know them. So here's how to assess them. If you ask them questions in the interview, not hypotheticals, not case studies, not what would you do in this situation, but tell me about a time when you exhibited that behavior that I think is important for the expectations, like you met my expectations. So for example, tell me about a time when you built software or features that you're most proud of. Now I'm going to ask this person to tell me about the task that they did. You can see, if you remember, this lines up with that expectation about, let's try and bring that up. If you remember, this lines up with the reliably deliver high quality software, right? So we're lining up with these expectations. So tell me about a time when you built software or features that you're most proud of, right? And I'm going to ask further questions about this, like what made you proud of this, and what did other people say about this, and how do you define high quality and high efficiency? How did you know it was high efficient? And I'm looking for their actual experience in doing this. Tell me about a time when you guided or mentored a junior software engineer. And then I'm going to ask, well, what happened to this person? How did they develop? What was your contribution? Tell me about a time when you helped build a stronger team. What did you do? And how did that work? And how did it work out? Tell me about a time when you contributed to your team's roadmap or strategy, when you worked on a complex problem spanning multiple products or teams, when you collaborated with cross-functional teams to get something done. Now, all of these things are things that anyone, if you're a senior software engineer level person, you should have had experiences like these, and you should be able to talk about these. And what you're going to be doing when you're hiring someone, when you're asking these questions, is you're looking at these the answers to these stories, you're digging deeper, you're asking further questions for clarification, to probe a bit deeply, find out where the limits of their performance was, what went well, what went badly, are they self-aware enough to know what went badly, You're asking all those things, and then you're comparing that against your expectations for the role that you're hiring and the level that you're hiring. So if you know that you're expecting somebody to be able to, as a senior software engineer, you want them to be able to work on complex problems spanning multiple products or teams, and they tell you that they did this the only example they have is a very, very simple bug fix, it's probably not really at the level that you're looking for. If they tell you that they developed this feature that was used by multiple teams or went across teams that integrated with different areas of the product, well, that's probably more interesting. And you can ask questions to assess the complexity of this. Is this literally just they enabled a feature that was already existing in a library, or did they actually do some design work? Now, obviously, again, apply this to your own situation. If you're in marketing or finance or sales, you've got different kinds of questions to be asking and different kinds of things to be going deep in. Secondly, how do you assess? How do you assess people when you're doing performance assessment? Now, the thing here is really about comparing performance versus expectations. It's a similar concept to when you're hiring, but with people that are working for you. You want to not just to have this subjective assessment of their performance in the abstract. You want to be really clear about, here's what I expect, and here's what your performance was, and here's how they balance up. So you can sort of say this kind of thing, like in this, you can use this in your head when you're thinking, when you're talking to your peers and your managers about the assessment of your team, or when you're communicating with the person. But from a role and level, I expect this expectation. And this means this application in our team, this kind of example. I see this performance, therefore I give you this assessment. Right now, that is a very objective way of assessing people, but it works in situations where there's a huge amount of ambiguity. So an example of this might be something like, as a senior software engineer, I expect you to contribute to the roadmap and technical strategy. This means collaborating with the tech lead to draft and review our strategy document and roadmap. You drafted the infrastructure section of the strategy document and participated in reviewing it with peers and accounting for their feedback, and that was great. But you left the roadmap entirely to the tech lead, and she had to write it alone without your support or input. Therefore, you're missing expectations as a senior software engineer. Now, what I've said hopefully is something that this person is aware of. Like they shouldn't find this a surprise. This is a factual statements, but it should become very clear why this is a gap between the expectations and their performance, and now they can understand this gap. Clearly, if they're meeting these expectations, we have a clear set of evidence for why they're meeting my expectations. Why they meet expectations, not a misses. Now, I use meets, exceeds, and misses expectations for performance assessments because that's what I've been using at Amazon, at Google, and places like that. Some companies use different kinds of ways of doing things, but the key thing here is to be really clear about your expectations. And whenever you're having those discussions that you always have with your colleagues, with your manager about why do you assess this person is performing really well? What do you mean? You want to be really clear about your expectations, how you apply that in your team, what that means in your context, and then what this person actually did and how that compares to your expectations. And the reason you're doing this, especially when you're communicating with others in your organization, is you're calibrating. And you're calibrating against, well, someone's like, you know what, I think your expectations are really too high there. I would expect that of a staff level software engineer or a tech lead, not of just a senior software engineer. Or they might say, is that, you really think that's high performance for a senior software engineer? Yeah, this is what I think of a senior software engineer. And now you get to have that conversation about what is the right level of expectation. And that then informs all of your work with your teams and how you build high performing teams. Right. How do you coach? Now, how do you use this in coaching? Coaching is interesting. So there's a lot of different opinions about coaching, but the best sort of format of coaching that I've seen is something along these lines, where you start off with permission. You're asking this question like, I believe I'm seeing something I think I'm seeing something that I believe is holding you back. Are you in a place where you can hear that right now? And you're asking for permission to have that coaching conversation. You want to try and do this as close as possible to discovering the issue or the performance gap or whatever it is, or the area that you think is good for development. But you're asking for permission. Are we ready to have this conversation? Because it could be a difficult one. It might be a gap. It might be just something that I think you can develop and benefit from. But are you ready? And they usually say, yes, I'm ready. Let's hear it. I'm keen. But sometimes they'll say, no, I'm not ready. I'm not in the right frame of mind. I'm just about to run to another meeting. You say, well, if not, when's good for you? Is tomorrow morning okay? And you schedule it in. As a leader, as a manager, it's your job to make sure that people are getting this feedback in a timely way. So you have to push to make sure this happens. So then you go on with the permission. You've talked about the permission. You've got permission. You start off with the situation. For example, at the meeting with stakeholders yesterday, when we were reviewing our plans with them, right? So we know what the context is. Now, ideally, the closer you do this to the time that this particular behavior or work happened, the better, because the easier it is to identify what exactly situation we're talking about here. If you're ever in a situation where you're trying to give someone feedback or coaching or help someone to develop, and you have to talk about these vague situations where when we're in meetings, this happens, it's really hard for them to understand which meetings and what was happening. They don't always remember the things that you remember. So the closer you do it to the time, the better. Now, you go on for after situation. Here's the behavior or the work that you did, right? For example, you dismissed their concerns by saying they didn't understand the technology, right? That's the situation that happened in this meeting, or the behavior. If this was work, this might be something along the lines of you produced a report and it was very confusing for people, or the table was not filled in, or whatever it was that's missing. There was errors in the table, or whatever it is. Like the actual assessment of the work. Now, clearly, you need to have some expertise, at least in the ability to assess the work or the behavior as a manager. You can't do this with naivety, right? So you have to have some understanding of this. Then you talk about the impact. And in this case here, we've just talked about you dismissed their concerns by saying they didn't understand the technology. And if the impact might be, well, of course you're right, they don't understand technology, but they're now questioning the funding for our project instead of supporting it. And we'll have to meet with the CFO next week. And that we haven't really come to an agreement with them. We haven't made any progress with them because they felt attacked. Now, you're stating this out like that. And then you're asking for their reaction. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree? Do you see this? Do you see what I'm seeing here? Is this a fair assessment of the situation? Do you understand it? Do you feel like there's a problem? You're not necessarily asking all those questions, but you're waiting for them to respond. But you're looking for, what do they assess about this situation? Do they think there's a gap here? And then finally, you talk about actions. What do we do going forward? Now, this is a standard coaching model. And one thing you do want to know about this clearly is that middle section there, the situation, behavior impact, or situation, work impact, is pure. You've got to keep that purely factual. There's no assessment in there. You're asking them for their assessment, their reaction. So this is a traditional coaching model. And one of the things that has to happen here is they need to understand the gap between their performance, what actually happened, like their behavior or work and the impact of that, and the expectation. Because if you're in a situation like that one I just described, if that was a junior software engineer, I probably shouldn't be expecting them to do quite that much of handling those stakeholders. They're not really ready for that yet, maybe. Now, it depends on your expectations in that specific situation. But I should, a senior software engineer, I should be expecting that. So I need to be very clear about that. So when we have this situation, what we're doing is we're talking about the performance of what actually happened, and we're helping them understand the gap between the performance and the expectations. Now, hopefully when you ask for their reaction, they talk about that, they understand that, because hopefully the way you've expressed the behavior or the work and the impact is closely enough related to your expectations, and you've been explicit enough about your expectations in the past that they should understand this. But if they don't, you need to make sure that you're clear about this, and you explain what your expectations are and make sure that they're clear on this, because that may be the problem. If they say, I think I handled that well, or I think that went well, I think I'm comfortable with what I did. Well, maybe I don't think I should be able to do that. That's not my role. Whatever it is, you need to be clear about the expectations. Now, what coaching is all about is about helping them get from the performance, from where they are, to the expectations, covering that gap, crossing the gap. But to do this, they have to understand the performance and what the gap is between the performance and the expectations. Right? If you've been clear about your expectations up front, that becomes easier. If not, you have to go through that process. And finally, we're going to talk about how you promote. So what's promoting all about? Promoting is not a reward for good performance in your current role, right? Good performance in your current role, at least. Now, this is one of those things that varies by company, to be honest. But the idea here is that good performance in your current role is what's expected. And that is, you should get reward for that. You should get a bonus. You should get continued employment. You should get extra equity or whatever it is. But you're not going to get promotion. You get a promotion for meeting the next level expectations. Right? And what that means is being clear about, here's what I expect from a junior software engineer or a mid-level software engineer, and here's what I expect from a senior software engineer. So you might say things like this: from a role and level, I expect this expectation, but from a role and next level, I expect this higher expectation. I'm seeing this performance, therefore promotion or no promotion. Now, what I'm saying, as an example, I'm going to walk through this. As a software engineer, I expect you to identify and solve problems within our team. You've been doing that well for 2 years. As a senior software engineer, I would expect you to identify and solve complex problems spanning multiple teams. This quarter, you worked with the checkout and shopping cart teams to develop a feature to sell digital products, and their senior engineers accepted your design with only minor changes. Therefore, I think you're ready for promotion to a senior software engineer. Now, Saying that like that helps people understand what is the expectation that I'm at, what's the expectation of the next role, what's the gap, what do I have to do? Because you can use this in your coaching. Even in your coaching, you can be saying, you're doing really well for currently, but if you want a promotion, here's what we need to do. You need to be working with other teams, so identifying and solving complex problems with other teams. So how do we apply that in our situation? But if you're talking about this promotion, this is one of those situations you're with your managers, your peers, they're discussing a promotion. Should we promote this person or should we not? You want to be able to say, here's why, here's the reason why, here's my expectation from this level, here's my expectation from that level, and here's why they're meeting that level. Here's why they're ready to be a senior software engineer or a senior financial planner or whatever it is we're doing here, like a lead marketer or whatever it is we're doing, right? You want to be really clear about those gaps. But once you've seen this way of doing things, when you're doing the promotion and you're talking about that, especially when you're talking about it with your peers and a manager and so on, it becomes really useful in the coaching because you want to be able to help them set up for that situation where I want to coach you to get to the point where I can have this conversation with my manager to promote you to senior. And to do that, I need to demonstrate that you have identified and solved complex problems spanning multiple teams, right? So I've got a clear direction to go, a clear target, and my expectations are really useful. So how do you use these expectations in practice? What do you do if you don't have this well developed in your organization? If they are well developed in your organization, the process is slightly different. But if they're not, here's where to start. Number one, review your roles and levels, and the levels one above the roles of the people in your organization, because you need to understand the career paths and promotion steps, the next level, for every one of your reports. So if you have a senior software engineer, you need to understand, what do I expect from a senior software engineer? But then what's the next level? Is it manager, or is it staff software engineer, for example, or principal software engineer, or architect, or whatever it is you have in your organization? What's their next step? This might be even specific to their particular career desires, but you need to understand, well, what is it that I expect from someone who is going to go into that role, and how do I articulate that? So review these and understand those expectations. Now, secondly, write down your expectations. Write them down both in this slightly abstract form of I expect them to solve complex problems spanning multiple teams, that kind of thing. And write down specifically how this would apply in your team. So for example, I expect you to be able to collaborate with the software, the checkout team and the browse team and the search team and the UI team or whatever it is to create features that span multiple products or something like that, right? You want to just get really clear about what that is. Just write it down. This does not have to be final, so you're going to iterate on this, right? But write it down so you're clear on it. Thirdly, discuss these expectations first with your peers to make sure that you're calibrated and you're kind of agreeing, like, am I off base here? You have senior software engineers. Are my expectations aligned with yours? Are this similar to yours? Do you have different expectations? Can I learn from you? Can we articulate this together? Because you have to be somewhat consistent across the organization. Discuss it with your manager. You can discuss it with your manager first, but often it helps to align with your peers as well. Discuss it with your manager to get their feedback. Like, I'm in this situation where I have these junior software engineers or junior marketers or whatever it is. At some point in time, I want to promote them as a senior. Here's what I'm going to expect. And once I do this, because you're kind of having an agreement with them about this is what it means to be promoted, I want to make sure that if I'm in a situation where my team do perform like this, then I can promote them to that level as long as everything else is lined up, right? And then discuss them with your team. Make sure your team understand this and they're clear on what this means. And in fact, make sure that they kind of agree with it. Because if they don't agree with it, you're going to have to keep iterating somehow to get to a point where you're pretty aligned on what makes a senior software engineer. And part of this is about making sure that your senior software engineers are currently performing at that level. And so on. If you have HR, you definitely want to talk to them about it as well. Now, HR often has a process called leveling, where they'll create role descriptions, job descriptions, and role definitions and so on, and levels within these roles, and formalize this. If you're in a larger organization, that's probably happening. Like usually that happens at about 500 to 1,000 people, thereabouts. And if it hasn't happened and you're that large and you're a HR person, I recommend doing it as soon as you can. because it gets very, very painful when you're much larger than 1,000 people. But have this, so as a manager, as a leader, have this discussion, keep iterating and aligning and calibrating. And I say keep doing this, partly because you have to do it to start off with quite a bit, but keep going because it's an ongoing process. Expectations change over time. Even people's expectations, individual expectations change, and you have to bring them back and recalibrate them. You'll get new managers in the team. You have to bring them on board and help them understand what the expectations are. So you need to be really good at this. You'll have new people. You have to be good at explaining your expectations and applying them to your organization. And then finally, use them as a bar. Not that kind of bar. Hang on. Use them as a performance bar. Use them in the way we've discussed. So use them for hiring, use them for assessing, use them for coaching and promoting your team. And use them explicitly, like talk about, here's my expectation. This is the bar. This is what it means to be a senior software engineer or a senior marketer or whatever it is. And this is what it means to get to the next level. This whole same thing applies also to managers. So this is what it means to be a manager. This is what it means to be a senior manager. This is what it means to be a director. This is my expectation from a director in engineering, right? I expect you to be able to do this kind of thing as a director in engineering. And now obviously that is partly going to be about developing your teams and about explaining your expectations to your peers and colleagues and your teams and coaching your own managers within your organization to be able to use this kind of framework as well. All right, so that's Amazon's secret to building high-performing teams. It's the bar. You may have heard, by the way, of Amazon's bar raising process. That's all about raising this bar or making sure that every time you take an action, no one's lowering the bar. You're actually consciously trying to raise it every time. But to do that, you have to have a bar. You have to have a set of expectations that are clear, that are really explicit for every role and level, and every manager needs to be really astute, really good at using them, and they need to be used all the time in your organization. Every time there's a hiring situation, every time you're assessing a person in their performance, every time you're coaching someone, every time you're promoting someone, and yes, every time you're firing someone as well. So I hope that's been useful and interesting for you. If you found it useful, please leave a subscribe and a like and a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. There's been some good discussions on LinkedIn on this topic just recently, so feel free to join me there as well. In the meantime, have a great week and scale well.